This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Welcome everybody to episode 39 of Breaking Banks Europe. I'm Francesca Aliverti and today I'm going to be your host. And today we are having a panel discussion for our ecosystem Zoom In series. And the focus of today is going to be the Dutch ecosystem, so the Netherlands. And I'm very happy to introduce you two old friends of mine, actually. Professionally speaking, I can actually say they can be considered my mom and dad, if you don't mind. We have Don Ginsel, founder of Holland FinTech. Ciao, Don.
Ciao.
You are actually quite familiar with our podcast. It's third or fourth times you are here. So
something like that, yeah. Losing count already. It's fun.
You know the rules, yeah. And Elizabeth Kleinfeld from Startup Bootcamp. Ciao, Liz.
Ciao, Francesca. Ciao, Don.
Good. So maybe we can actually start, as usual, by introducing yourself. Tell us who you are, what are you doing, what's your organization doing, and so on. Liz, maybe ladies first. You want to start?
Sure. So I'm working with Startup Bootcamp, responsible for the partners. If those of you who don't know what Startup Bootcamp is, it's an accelerator program for early stage startup. And I'm responsible for the partners in the FinTech and Cybersecurity program. And I started working at Startup Bootcamp 4 years ago after working with Don and Francesca at Holland FinTech. And basically, I'm a matchmaker. That's what I did at ABN AMRO, at Holland FinTech. I like to bring startups and scale-ups together to sometimes work together, but also to help them find investment, to find a proof of concepts and sign commercial contracts.
Thanks, Liz. Don, your turn.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I must say, indeed, Liz is a hell of a matchmaker. So it's definitely nice to be working with you still, also now that you're at Startup Bootcamp. Now, my name is Don Ginsel. I founded Holland FinTech about, I think, almost 6 years ago as an independent place where all the developments around FinTech could come together. Basically seeing it as a transformation of the whole financial industry where startups play a large role, but also the incumbent players are all going through quite a severe transformation, accelerated by external events, but also partly driven by internal demand of customers. And that puts a lot of pressure on all players, I think, and there's a lot of collaboration opportunities. So what we're trying to do is actually figure out how do we help people understand each other better and find each other to collaborate.
Great. And my actually first question is for you, Don, and goes a bit back in the days, let's say. So also Liz, actually, you both had the chance to see the rise of FinTech in the Netherlands from the very beginning. And I also do remember at Holland FinTech, the first years we had far less members than what is now. What is that? 500 more companies now. So
yeah.
I do remember when at the beginning were a bunch of members. But I was thinking about that these days, actually. What is really impressive for me is that at the beginning, so back 6 years ago, one of the first companies that were joining the network were actually the 4 big banks, which were quite immediately forward-looking into what fintech developments were. And if I think about other ecosystems, this is quite unusual, I would say. I still see a lot of banks thinking about their own initiatives, their own small ecosystem, instead of joining maybe a larger group or an organization like Holland FinTech. I'm very curious about your idea around that, because for me, this is really the perfect Dutch behavior, like I see an opportunity, I see maybe this wave coming and I want to be part of it. I don't want to miss out. What's your take on that?
I think it has a lot to do with relatively small. Let's say it's not a small market, because I think the economy of the Netherlands is quite big. I think now actually number 4 or 5 in Europe. But at the same time, you see that the banking industry is heavily concentrated. So indeed, if you have the 4 biggest banks, you have over 90% of the market. And I always find it very interesting to see that these banks are constantly in a balance between quite fierce competition, which they would do to see how they could, for example, you see that around there, some of the new apps and products that they're trying to launch, that is very often very fierce competition. But at the same time, they also know where to find each other to collaborate. I think one of the more appealing examples there is that when the credit cards were coming up as an important payment means, together with the rise of e-commerce, they actually joined forces to set up their own online payment platform called Ideal, which is now the dominant payment platform in the Dutch market. Yeah. I think over 95% of transactions are being paid through this platform, which gives a lot of power to the banks instead of the credit card companies. So I think they really have a smart way of collaborating and try to sort of balance between collaboration and competition, which of course always is again a regulatory challenge as well, because competition between banks, and let's say anti-competition between banks, is quite fierce. So the competition authorities are always on their game, as well as the financial regulators. But for example, and I think maybe to draw that in, one of the things that you see now as the bigger challenges for the market at the moment is anti-money laundering. There's a fierce campaign from Europe to fight money laundering across the board. And now you see also that they're actually trying to collaborate between these bigger banks and the Ministry of Finance to actually set up a facility to join forces to combat this criminal behavior. Which again, I think is a smart thing to do, because it's pretty hard to do that as an independent bank. But it might be much harder for other markets, which are more fragmented in the banking landscape, to do something similar.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that it's very interesting initiative. And I think even 6 years ago, we were talking, can we not collaborate more? But then regulation was behind. And now that we're able to do this, I think we're going to find a lot of, let's say, fraudulent players that we can take out more quickly, because we start to share information and work together. When Holland FinTech came about, I remember I was on a team at ABN AMRO led by Menno van Leeuwen. And he said, hey, Liz, you got to see this initiative. It's really great. We were already trying to work with startups. I think I had introduced, we had these Startup Friday sessions, maybe 40 startups and scale-ups to the bank. And then after we said, we're going to join forces and help part of the launching partners, let's say, of Holland FinTech, I remember thinking, this is really what I want to be doing, because I can do more of this matchmaking, not at one bank, but at many different banks, and not only the banks, but the pension processors and the consultants of the world, the insurers. So 5 years ago, I left ABN AMRO and joined Holland FinTech, because I really believed in what Don was doing, and I still do. I enjoy the fact that we can work together so much. And I think the working together, that is part of what makes this Dutch ecosystem so interesting. I also remember
definitely
time where we had on a Friday afternoon, because the second Friday of every month is when the Holland FinTech meetup, and it was at KPMG. Maybe there was even one before that at ABN AMRO, and we had the FinTech 50 ladies there, and they said we could never get 250 or 300 people in London on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
That shows.
No, that was always quite impressive, I have to say.
That ecosystem, I think. Yeah.
Because people were showing a lot of interest from the very beginning. The banks were in. Even a law firm was one of the founding members, which is something that it's really quite unusual. But Liz, working at Startup Bootcamp also, this is also, part of the game. Trying to put together all these different stakeholders, let's say. So, of course, the bootcamp is based a lot on the startups, but also a lot on the partners and on the members. So how do you see the topic of collaboration working at Startup Bootcamp between the incumbents and new players? the different people that are pledging their time actually to mentor the startups? What makes it different in the Dutch ecosystem?
Well, I think that there's a lot of commitment to mentor these young companies, and it gives people energy. So I was mentoring companies at Startup Bootcamp from ABN AMRO, from Holland FinTech, and then started investing in a few of them. When you see, how much your knowledge and network can help these young players that have 3 months. So I like to say, when I'm explaining the difference between Holland FinTech and Startup Bootcamp, that Holland FinTech is an ecosystem builder in the breadth of the term, with the 600 plus members, from somebody with an idea to the largest FIs, everyone in between the value chain, and not just in Holland. Well, similarly, if you think about it, Startup Bootcamp, we have international partners as well, right? So we have an Italian bank, a French bank, Rabobank as partners. We have an ecosystem builder, FinTech Matters, kind of like the Holland FinTech of Austria. And they want to collaborate with startups that have technologies that they're looking for. They want to look at cutting edge technologies. Now, a very early stage startup may be a little bit too early for them. So they like to see the deal flow. And sometimes they ask, well, if we want to do a solution to, let's say, do online onboarding, and you have to set up an identity and then verify that identity, then instead of having one player that then they have to do, an integration with 2 or 3 companies, they say, oh, can you help these companies to integrate first, and then we'll test it. And that has happened a number of occasions. And we had a company in the first cohort, iProve, that did actually integrated with a company called InnoValor. They have Read ID technology. Dawn and I had seen them. They joined a mission in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And then after that integration, they were in the Rabobank app, and then ING and a Norwegian bank. So you see that, often if one of the big players does a test with a company, and the others follow. And the other thing that I see a lot is that if they are testing a technology and that works well, then their corporate venture capital arms are often putting
double deep in that,
into those startups. So Tink is an example from Sweden. They did a trial with ABN AMRO with, I think, 1,000 clients. Maybe it was also 5 years ago. It was a while ago. And then they ended up investing and rolling it out to, 3 million or more clients, and investing again and again. So I think that kind of, if we're going to try to work with these early stage companies and help them, then why don't we also have some upside potential? I think that's
I think this is all the power of the network and of the connection. You actually mentioned that both your organization have quite an international aim. And this is also interesting about the Netherlands, because, of course, allow me to say that both Startup Bootcamp and Holland FinTech, they can claim, of course, to be international, because the Netherlands is also very attractive. So a lot of companies are interested in entering the market.
It's a bit of a stepping stone in Europe. Much more like a hub than an endpoint. So everything you do in the Dutch market is really aimed at abroad, because you won't go for the Dutch market so fast.
It's true, and it's also quite small market. But what is also very interesting for me is that a lot of companies are choosing the Netherlands maybe as test market as well. Maybe because Dutch people are quite fast adopters of technologies, because it's a favorable environment, or because, you tell me, I don't know. For me, it's really...
It already helps to have a very high English proficiency and kind of a welcoming culture, plus facilities for foreign workers, for example. Right, and I think that's also one of the things that I think we will see benefiting the Dutch market a lot in the coming period due to Brexit. Right, so I think a lot of foreign workers were prone to go to the UK before, but they've basically closed borders to foreigners to a large extent already, just like the UK also now recently has. So that's going to put quite some pressure on. And I think you already feel now in the discussions on the European Committee and all the decisions that the country leaders need to make, that the Dutch government is moving into the position of the UK government, basically, as the most Anglo-Saxon country, I think, in Europe at the moment. But I think that's from the fact that how venture capital works with international connections. I think the Dutch market is going to benefit from that a lot.
And I think we were already benefiting from it because we're less expensive than London. So, I even would hear some people who lived in the middle of Great Britain say, well, I'd rather just take a flight over to Amsterdam. It takes me less time than to have to drive into London. So I think we benefit from that. The one area that I think that the UK is, let's say, better poised is with the FCA. And then we talked about this before. Yep. Don has done a number of segments for the Startup Bootcamp folks. And one of them was, the Financial Conduct Authority, part of their remit is competition, to stimulate that. Yeah. That is not part of the remit of the Authority for Financial Markets, which means that we have less challenger banks than they do in the UK. I wonder if this will change any time. What do you think?
No, I think, let's say, it's quite a principal standpoint to actually put economic empowerment, as in how I see competition authority elaborating, plus prudential supervision, as the central bank is doing it. To put them in one hand, I think it really doesn't fit the way people see that governance should work. And also, I don't think that we'll have a similar organization. I do see that just now, before the summer holiday kicked in, the Ministry of Finance, together with the Ministry of Economic Affairs, have presented their FinTech action plan. Even though it's still fairly high over, I do believe that they have a really good intention to actually improve the climate. And they are planning to do excursions towards Singapore, London, and other places where they see that they have a thriving fintech ecosystem, and they are willing to learn. So I do think it's quite some steps before we are there, just as far as the FCA is. I think also it has to do with the fact that the dependency on the financial system is less here than it is in London, right? I think that the dependency of the UK on the financial industry is just so vast that, of course, they will do innovation there, and of course they will ensure their dominant position, because it will hamper the economy immediately if they lose it. But I do believe that there's now a good trend towards trying to explore what the benefits are of these kind of systems, as they do in other places like Singapore and London.
I do have a question, actually. Francesca, do you mind?
Go ahead. Yes, of course. Go ahead, Liz. Of course.
And it has to do with COVID and what I've seen in terms of the challengers versus the incumbents being able to process loans more quickly for SMEs in the UK than in the Netherlands, because it seems like mainly the big Dutch banks, the big 3, 4, they're the ones who are doing most of it, but it's taking a really, really long time. It's not filtering down to the SMEs. Don, do you see that changing any time, that we might have an easing of this more like the UK?
I'm not so sure yet. I think what you will see now is that it takes quite a while to really evaluate how it's going. And so I think once the figures come out that the process is actually not working optimally, I think it's already too late to really adapt it. Because I think by later this fall, I do believe that already you will see that also the government will be more careful with their support programs. I think they already announced some of the programs to end this fall. And so also the credit guarantees probably will be more strict. So I'm not sure that that's really going to help on a short notice. What I did see is that what I think was actually already quite surprising is that they opened the facility to guarantee banking loans. They opened it up to alternative financiers. And I think that they already did, and it was definitely a rough process because of course they weren't made for each other. But I think that they were able to do that and open up these guarantees to alternative financiers is a really big mind shift already from a government perspective. And I think that already gave quite some access to credit to parties that otherwise wouldn't have it.
That's great. And when did they do that?
I think they started that about 2 months ago, but it took quite a while for the first ones to get the approval. And I think now very gradually, every couple of weeks, another one got approved. I think there are now about 15 or so
That's great.
that got an approval.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely you see also a lot of things coming from the government, which is, compared to other countries, quite good in terms of supporting the startup ecosystem. I was laughing before when you were mentioning the fact that the government has actually a plan for FinTech development, which is like quite impressive, thinking as an Italian. That's another story. So we can actually go now for a short break, and we get back in a couple of minutes.
Do you want to be part of Breaking Banks Europe? Reach out and learn more about the opportunity to be featured in one of our shows. With over 1.6 million listeners and counting, Breaking Banks Europe is bound to become the place to advance critical dialogue in Europe and the UK fintech scene. Reach out on Instagram or Twitter at Breaking Banks EU, or go to www.provoke.fm.
Welcome back to Breaking Banks Europe. We are again here with Don and Liz, respectively from Holland FinTech and Startup Bootcamp. And before the break, we were actually discussing about the Dutch ecosystem in general, of course, but more into depth about some specifics of the Dutch government in supporting the startups during this period, this COVID period. And related with that, I would actually want to ask a question about the last report that Holland FinTech released. Actually, for the ones who don't know about that, I strongly recommend to keep an eye on all the news, reports, knowledge that Holland FinTech is sharing, because it's quite impressive. And being there for quite some years, I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, and about that, so the last report was called The State of Dutch FinTech Market in 2020. And I was quite interested, actually, by a figure that I saw related to the drivers for development. And what the respondents were showing is that they foresee a drop in the marketing expenses and a much more focus on new technologies development, which I think it reflects quite well the state of the situation we are living. So I can imagine actually that the startups will much more focus on a much more picky and demanding kind of consumer that wants to be much more protected and save money in a better way. Instead of a marketing budget. So just to be hard on that, cutting the bullshit, I would say. What do you think about that, Don? How do you think it's going to develop in the next months and maybe the next year?
No, I really concur with your conclusion there. I do think as well that currently, let's say before the traditional way of working was always, you build a factory, you start pooping out products, and then you get the marketing department to make sure people want them. But we also know that doesn't really work that well anymore these days, because products should just adapt continuously to what customers want, and the product should basically sell itself. So ideally, it also actually has features that spur virality, as one of the nice words that especially the growth hackers, which is now the new fancy word for marketeers, always try to sell you, right? So it basically comes down to, if you can invite your friends to use the same product and benefit from the fact that your friends are there, the people that use your product will help you grow your product. And I think that the features like that are increasingly important in any kind of technical feature or product that you're trying to build. And I fully understand that people are focusing their budgets more on this, which is, of course, indeed not a marketing budget, but a technical budget, rather than doing campaigns on TV or online, or paying influencers just to use your product. And of course, there are still some parties that are going for the more traditional ways. And let's say the modern way of marketing would then be through influential marketing, Instagram, things like that. But I think for a lot of financial products, that usually doesn't work that well. So I think that's much more intrinsic connection that people want to make with the technology itself.
Can I add on to that?
Of course, Liz, go ahead.
I also think it's building groups to work together again. So like you see Rabobank working with Signicat, and first I think they were a client of Signicat, then they start to offer the services of Signicat, maybe half of the kinds of services that Signicat can offer for digital identity and compliance type of solutions. And then you see that at a certain point, they will probably offer 100% of the Signicat solutions. So that they start to create new business models around working together with different startups. And some of the tests for these new business models, they will work, and some of them, will not. But I do like the fact that you see those kinds of shifts taking place. And I'm not sure that we would have seen that 5 years ago, but these are certainly relationships that have been struck, in the past 5 or 6 years even, and then just building upon that.
Yeah. And combining your 2 points of view, what you just said, what I was feeling also reading the report is also a sort of tendency more towards quality than quantity, let's say. So also when talking about the partnerships, they still see a very good focus on that. So they still see the importance of creating partnership, to cooperate and so on. But probably these times also gave us the opportunity to reflect on which kind of partnership, because it's not only about marketing, chit-chatting and say we are partnering up. It's more like strategical partnership. Am I
100%
the right path, you think?
Yeah, I think they're tired of trying to see, with every small startup, can we do something? Because at the end of the day, if they're too small, they cannot do that much. So when a company gets a certain amount of scale, then that is seen to be more quality, let's say, and it makes it easier for them to do that. Plus, when it's not just innovation departments testing things, but the remit comes from and is driven from the business, then I think there's a much higher chance of those partnerships surviving.
Yeah, Don, you were saying.
No, so I fully agree. I think we see basically the maturity of the startup and fintech ecosystem. So you see that, of course, 5 years ago, everyone, if you would put a startup label on you, everyone would hype up about it and basically want to work with you because it was cool and hip and everything else. Although no one actually knew what to do once they had you, right? So it's
for sure,
and maybe they will kill you. Actually,
no, exactly. So that's one of that was then quite worrisome. So we really had to go through the cycle of sort of familiarizing with what's really going on, what are the underlying drivers, and why would we actually want to do something in this space. And I think that's that very slowly trickled down. And I see people now much smarter in being purposeful in the way that they want to go into relationships and partnerships, understanding also much better how to do it, right? Really learning from each other, having programs to really figure out to set up a proper collaboration. Because I think until now, especially from an incumbent perspective, most parties would still be better at investing in a startup company than actually collaborating with one, because usually the procurement departments were not involved in the innovation game. So you see a real disbalance there. And I think at some point you will see that indeed innovation has a lot of could have many different goals. So you have to be really sure why you do it, right? So you could try to keep track of the market. You could really want to buy new products to sell. You could basically buy new features to build into your products or enhance your own capabilities and look, for example, for acqui-hires.
Yeah.
Different goals, they require a completely different approach to the way that you work with the parties in the market. And so you can't indeed work with an innovation department to take care of all that, especially since they're very often not that well connected to the rest of the organizations. And I see now that's very slowly is becoming much more trickle down to the business units themselves that could really try to solve a business problem with innovation. And that's I think really the strongest motivation to do something proper.
Yeah, and I mean, with the work we are doing at FTS, we see exactly the same. I mean, most of the times I'm much more happy when we can match the needs of for example, the corporate venture fund together with the business unit, because in that case means that we did a good job, and actually the bank in that case can really benefit from a solution that can use internally. I actually want to double click a bit more on the investment side. So if we see the numbers for now are still quite good, I would say, at least in the Netherlands. But I mean, what I want to ask you is, I know we don't have the crystal ball, but what type of drop are you going to expect in the coming period if we are talking about the drop?
I think we'll see a slight drop. I think mostly smaller deals are more prone to be swinging with the sentiment. So I think that because especially if you have to work with angel investors, for example, or smaller VCs, I think let's say the volatility is much higher, and the deals, especially when the deals have a shorter cycle, you see more volatility. But especially the numbers have been very high still, because a lot of the deals were started already back in 2019 before the crisis, and so they were just wrapping up the deal these days. At the same time, we should also conclude that there's just so much liquidity in the market, and there's no return to be getting anywhere in decent markets, right? So, I mean, you could go to the stock market, but I think it might be good to also assume that we will get a correction there. So don't go all long, I would say. But the same goes, I think, for let's say what you see is that there's a lot of money that is looking for ways to get a proper return. And we even see institutional investors very, very often now shifting more towards riskier assets. So you get a bit of trickle-down effect from the riskless asset classes like government bonds. You see, as they basically now on negative returns, they basically trickle down the money towards, also private equity and venture capital. And so I think that's quite interesting to see what that's going to bring, because I think that liquidity is going to stick around for a while. So I think it's mostly going to be shorter periods of uncertainty. So, for example, if we will see a very strong, steep increase in COVID cases, then probably it will be quite hard for a period to do some deals. But once you see that the sentiment is better again, and for example, just like if basically follow the stock markets a bit, then it might actually be going quite well to raise some funding, as long as you've got your business sound and well prepared for basically the new reality of dealing with COVID. So let's say I wouldn't start a hotel these days.
Well, I'd like to piggyback on that and say, I think that companies that are really digitizing the process, they're going to have, investors wanting to invest in them now. Be that, if they're fintechs or cybersecurity companies or health tech platforms. But I do think the earlier stage, the money for the early stage stuff, there's going to be less, as we've seen. I would say maybe even 30% less.
And I mean, Liz, sorry to interrupt you. I mean, on this, actually, you can talk as an angel investor. So you probably have also the pulse of maybe how it's going to be in that kind of regard. Like people may be more afraid to invest on early stage.
I mean, our angel group is still investing, but of course, we do very small ticket size up to 50K. But I do see that we are also looking at deals that we never would have looked at before. Those companies would have never been interested in us before. And so we're being part of more syndicates now than pre-COVID, investing in companies that have very international focus. Like we just invested in a FinTech in Colombia. And we're looking at a metals company that's in the UK. I mean, we never would have looked at metals company, but they've had a correction, right? Because their biggest clients were the Boeings of this world. So we're getting in on deals that very early angels would have never gotten in on before. And I think that we're also a little bit more critical if there's no revenue being made. But that is in general something that I see in the European market versus the American market. Americans are not as focused on the immediate revenue. And I think European investors, even angels, would like to see some revenue if at all possible. That gives them some kind of confidence.
Yeah.
I concur to that. I think indeed early stage is going to be the toughest, and we'll definitely see a decrease there. But I think it's good to pick up on your point on the digitization. A lot of fintech companies are currently doing very well because they're usually tied into the online business. So they either help bank further digitize, which I think is now very high in demand, or they're focused on compliance, also still very high on demand, or they're doing things related to e-commerce, for example. So that or digital identity. So that whole space, and not to forget cybersecurity, by the way.
Yeah,
all these areas are currently still booming, and so they're very relatively sound investments. And so, I, from that perspective, I do believe that we will see the money to keep on flowing in that direction.
I do think it's going to keep flowing. Let's say with some of the, more Series A, Series B, Series C than the seed investments.
Yeah.
We're going to see. I mean, as Don was saying, the liquidity is there. So I believe at some point it's a circle, so it's like probably it's also, we just need to wait that this kind of uncertainty period is passing. But I think from your point of view, we should be quite positive.
Well, I am very positive. I mean, one of the companies that I mentored and then invested in 24 sessions, they're doing really great because they've been
of course, this is definitely
the process.
Then,
when they were at Startup Bootcamp, they didn't know if they were just going to be financial services or if they would, be like the Skype that helps doctors or lawyers, and they really focused first on mortgages.
But it's really about the momentum. There were companies able also to take advantage of, maybe not even take advantage of this moment, but understanding the requests from the market, and so being able to adapt and to shape better the company, which I think in general is something that Dutch companies are quite able to do.
You mean adapt?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's quite
I keep believing there on, but you know this mantra of mine, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So, and I think when people can also really get too comfortable with things going well, and I think that definitely goes for part of the Dutch market, which has been doing quite well for centuries. And, people are used to quite a high level, high standard of living, a decent income, even if you don't do that much. So I think that those are all things that sort of push down the energy of actually adapting. What I do think is helping now is that a lot of people are seriously worried about their job, their income, the value of their house. This crisis from that perspective, I think, is waking up everyone to
move the engine. Yes, of course.
Yeah. And then indeed, I think that's the biggest trigger at the moment that will drive creativity, new business models, new ideas. And so from that perspective, I do believe that people with angel money should keep their wallets ready because there's definitely a lot of new things coming out, I think.
So I want to add to that on the ecosystem bit, because angel money is not just a Dutch thing. It's linking the ecosystems in Italy, in the US. When you can do deals together, then you can help those companies really to do so much better, because it's not just they have Dutch financing or financing from the UK, but they have financing from a group that can help them enter other markets.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is it's all again about the cooperation we were talking about before. And of course, I mean, I don't always want to be the bad one, but okay, cooperation is good, but having the certainty that one market is kind of safe makes also the investor much more willing to put money into that market. Coming from maybe, different countries, different regions, but definitely this, I think, it's also a strong point from the Netherlands, let's say. So before wrapping up,
one nice anecdote to mix in there, which I recently read a book about the 80 years of war between the Dutch and the Spanish king, who was then still the owner of the Netherlands. And they basically said that one of the big reasons that the Dutch won in the end was the fact that they never defaulted on their debt. While what the Spanish king did, basically, he borrowed money, and then after a while he needed more, and he just basically said, okay, so that debt, it doesn't count anymore, but I need new money, so just give it to me.
I know something about it.
And what happened was that money, in the end, fled to more safer havens, like the Dutch Republic, that actually just never defaulted on the money and always was able to pay it back decently with an interest.
Listen, Don, let's not start the debt discussion because I am being appointed by all my Italian friends as the Dutch I cannot say a bad word because we are recording, but yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know. It's a tough time. Maybe we should do a different session on it because it is an interesting topic to explore because I do believe that we really misunderstand each other most of the time.
I think it's all anthropological kind of, and religious a lot, kind of behavior, way of we approach.
Good opportunities, though, that like if Dutch investors can invest in the status base and the true layers from Italy, and
which are London-based, Liz.
It doesn't matter. And if Italian investors can invest in some Dutch companies, UK companies, US companies, then we all help to make it
benefit from each other.
Just one ecosystem. It's not just the Dutch ecosystem. That's what's so interesting about it. Exactly. And we talked about Holland FinTech is not really the right term because it's FinTech that's more European. You've got, I think, members from all over the world practically, right?
Yeah.
And that's what really makes an ecosystem thrive as well. The fact that we're doing podcasts together is...
Of course, yeah. Definitely. And this is a very good way to wrap it up. I just want to thank you a lot, guys. And I really hope to see you very soon back in the Netherlands when we can.
Also, happy to come to Italy. Francesca.
Yes, of course, whenever you want. Definitely. Do you want to say maybe something to close up? Maybe any next appointment? I don't know if we can talk about future meetings yet, but maybe something that Holland FinTech is organizing or Startup Bootcamp is organizing that you want to share?
Well, maybe that's nice. We'll probably be doing something together. Liz and I were talking about this earlier today, is that even though it was announced today that Money 2020 Europe will not happen this year, that the Amsterdam FinTech Week, that was basically including Money 2020 in the same week, is going ahead and full throttle. And also together with Startup Bootcamp, we'll be organizing an event then. And so there's lots of things to do. So there's still plenty of reasons to come to Amsterdam in I think it's the third week of September. So from that perspective, I'd love to extend the invitation to everyone who's listening and watching to join us and dive deeper into what the Dutch market and through the Dutch market, the European market has to offer.
So
great. Then I will book my flight.
Yes, September 21st, we're going to have the demo day of our FinTech and Cyber cohort together with Holland FinTech, which is one of our partners. So we love to see you there, Francesca.
Of course.
For those people who don't yet subscribe, Dawn, to your newsletter, maybe there's a way to show a link at some point.
Yeah, I think our amazing Renata, which I thank for supporting us today, can put all the details in the description of the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks.
Great, guys. Thanks a lot.
Guys.
And thanks everybody for listening and watching. Ciao. Have a good day.
Ciao. You too.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.